a professional couple were being prosecuted for buying a young woman to live in their home and be their slave. And I just thought, this is it. This is the story I want to write.
Welcome to another edition of Beneath the Page. I'm Steve Couch.
And I'm Sophie Beal.
And we're joined today by a very special guest, Sue Barrow. Hi, Sue. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Great. I'll let Sophie introduce Sue in a moment. But I should say at this point, Sue's book, Sold, is published by Sophie's company, Cadence. And my role here is to make sure that what comes next isn't just a mutual back-patting exercise. Anyway, Sophie, can you tell us about her book?
Well, you are right. It was a bit of a no-brainer inviting Sue on this podcast. She's the brave woman who, after 15 years of working on her novel Sold, trusted me to publish it. She put up with my editing, which some people think of as an extreme sport. Thank goodness it paid off. To my relief, The Guardian called it compulsively readable, harrowing yet hopeful, and we had some other nice feedback as well.
I really want to know, what was Sophie really like to work with?
Well, she's very self-deprecating. I found Sophie to be an extremely accomplished editor. I had trouble with my word count. It was much too high. And she was ruthless, but in a nice way, because Sophie is, has got a very sweet nature. So she was constantly checking up with me and making sure I wasn't offended by things that she'd suggested. And we did have a couple of tussles, didn't we? But I managed to come to an agreement about everything. We're still really good friends.
Yes, which is testament.
Was it ruthless but well-meaning? Was that?
Yeah, I think essentially.
I like that. You should have business cards printed up.
Now, I often try to sum up Sold, but can you tell us what it's about?
Sold is the story of a girl called Rosa, who lives with her impoverished family in Albania, a country that is very high on the list for child trafficking into the UK. She is a very bright girl, but she's facing a fairly bleak future education-wise. And then her aunt suggests that she should go and live in the UK with some relatives who will give her a good home, etc., etc. But when she arrives, she finds that she's to be caring for their child, cooking, cleaning, no school, no friends, no going out. And this is to be her life. So the story is really about Rosa's bid for freedom, but in a terrible irony, when she does manage to escape this awful woman and her family, she finds herself in much deeper water. And the second half of the story is even more challenging for her, I think, than the first.
Why did you want to tell that story in particular?
I'd had some publishing success beforehand with a novel and then 2 children's history books, and I found myself really wanting a new project. And this is back in about 2000. I started discovering this thing called human trafficking. And I remember reading a Christian magazine called Tear Fund that was talking about children being taken from their homes, sometimes with their parents' agreement, who would be paid for them, bringing them to the UK under the false pretense of a better life, and the horrible stories that were emerging from that. Then a few years later, I came across a newspaper article about a professional couple who hailed from Nigeria originally and were living over here. They had been taken to court and were being prosecuted for buying a young woman to come and live in their home and basically to be their slave with no payment. This is a real story of a girl who lived like that for 5 years before she managed to alert the authorities, and then this couple were prosecuted, found guilty, and imprisoned. And I just thought, this is it. This is the story I want to write about a girl who's been through this dreadful experience, but has a hopeful ending. I was convinced somebody must have written a book like this already, but I couldn't find anything about domestic slavery, which is what we're talking about here. And I didn't really want to write a book about prostitution. Sadly, many girls find themselves caught in that dreadful trap, but I wanted it to be suitable for younger teenagers. And I did lots of research. The BBC by then were doing a lot of investigating, so they had some excellent reports on their website. Again, Christian anti-trafficking organisations like Stop the Traffic, International Justice Mission, others like that. And also a couple of adult novels which featured human trafficking. The Other Hand by Chris Cleave was immensely helpful. And so I started writing in about 2008, I suppose.
Rosa's first experience is of domestic slavery. It's not most people's idea of human trafficking. How common is it?
Oh, it's very, very common. It's so easy to hide somebody in a house like that. who maybe wasn't there the day before, just working behind closed doors is very rarely seen. So much of the publicity in the papers has been about sex trafficking. A lot of people just think that's what human trafficking is, and it is a massive part of it. But no, domestic slavery is a huge issue, particularly for younger girls, but also for women and for men as well. It's not something that we could underestimate.
Her first experience of trafficking is by relatives. Is that common?
Yes, it is, particularly in Africa. Yes, it's quite widely regarded as acceptable.
One of the book's themes is identity. Rose's identity is stripped from her very early on. Her date of birth is changed, so she seems older, and she's made to take on her captor's surname and pretend their child. Her journey towards freedom involves her remembering who she is and finding strength from this. She's really strong in comparison to many of us.
Yeah, you're right. Two things about that. I think Rosa comes across as a very strong character to start with, where her mother has got a chronic condition and is not at all well. Rosa is expected to take on the burden of running the home. She's got an older brother, but he's nowhere to be seen because she lives in a very patriarchal society where the women do all the stuff at home. Then she's got a younger brother as well, who she absolutely adores. And so she is used to running the home, really. And one of the scenes early on in the story is of her father breaking the news to her that she's going to have to leave school, even though she's managing to sort of juggle all these things because her mother is able to do less and less. So she comes to the UK with these great expectations of this wonderful life in her cousin's home. And what a shock, the first night she gets there, they all disappear out for a nice meal. She's told to stay at home and make up the beds, etc., etc. And by the end of the first week there, she is in no doubt about what's going on. Did her dad know about this? Did her aunt know about this when she suggested it? Has she just been lied to? She hasn't got any answers to that, and she doesn't get those for some time. But, your main character necessarily has to be somebody full of grit and determination. Otherwise, they're not going to capture the reader's interest. But I think I set her up really as somebody from those early chapters where she's talking to her dad and saying, please don't let me leave school. She knows she's bright. Her teacher knows she's bright. Her teacher encourages her. So I think she is well placed in a sense to come to the UK, have this awful thing happen to her, and be very crushed by it. Some of the early chapters when she's first in the UK, she turns up at a school, and the school that she assumed she'd be going to, she sees a couple of girls coming out. They're really horrible to her, and she's thinking, oh, this is just awful. She just goes back to the house and just cries. But then she kind of gets this a bit between her teeth. I am not going to be this person. So I am not this family's daughter. I will not be constrained by the, restrictions they're putting on me. And everything that she's doing then after that is aimed at trying to win her freedom from this family.
And in that, I think it's probably fair to say that she's very often let down by other people around her, in that there's
Yes.
several instances in the book where somebody sees something suspicious and doesn't act on it, whether that
That's
be
right. Yes.
the neighbour, or at one point she goes to the police and the police just deliver her back to her
Yeah,
captors.
that's right. Maybe not so much now, but certainly at the time I was writing this, that is not uncommon. The police have been criticised a lot for not taking seriously these kinds of cries for help. She is let down, Steve, you're right. I mean, the guy at the library tries to help her, he really does, but she doesn't want to know because she has to work her own way through this. And she's ashamed as well. She is really ashamed of what's happened to her. And again, I think that's a classic reaction. She loves her dad, and then to kind of admit to herself that he arranged this or he didn't ask enough questions. I mean, he's quite a weak character. So yeah, she is let down. And of course the neighbour as well, just this busybody, not really wanting to know. I think a lot of human nature comes out.
It gets even darker when she's moved to a holding house, doesn't it?
I had to sit down and think of something which would really make her wake up to the fact that she was in terrible danger. She's been a real pain in the neck to the woman who originally imprisoned her, and she's been sold on to a much larger cohort of people who are serious about trafficking. She arrives at a cannabis house where she's expected to be watering the plants, and they take her out into the back garden where she can see that there are a couple of freshly dug graves. I had to make sure that Rosa knew that her life was under threat, and I needed to make my readers see these people aren't messing around. Then the girl she was imprisoned with told her about one of the girls going missing, troublemaker who just disappeared overnight. Was this girl buried there somewhere? And was that going to be Rosa's fate?
Dealing with that weightiness, that the seriousness, how did that impact you while you were working on it?
Well, I did okay, actually. I mean, a few people have said that to me, and in some ways I've kind of felt, did I really feel that enough? I suppose I just thought I wasn't writing it for thrills. You're actually writing about a real world which these women are living in, but doing it within the parameters of writing for 12 to 18-year-olds. So I did find it hard, but I managed to do it.
What would you say your greatest values are, and where can we see them in your story?
I suppose, yes, freedom for people, fighting against injustice in unjust situations, kindness. I wanted to bring that out in the story, particularly through the character of Jason. His kindness is something that brings her to tears, really, in the early part of that. So I think when I'm writing my characters, I'm wanting to make sure that they do have these values, that they recognize injustice, they recognize when people are being unkind, when people are being kind.
So the values come across in the characters.
You have to have a character who readers are going to like. Okay, they may tell a few porkies, but essentially that character has to be mainly honest. They could be deceived by people and so on, but do you want your readers to be cheering your main character on, essentially? And they're not going to do that if they see some innate flaw that goes through the book and almost seems to be accepted. So I think for me, Rosa had to be somebody who was strong, who was determined. I think she had to recognize the value of family and see what she had lost, and so much regretting that. Again, just seeing the value of giving somebody a fair chance in life, which is what she deserved, and plenty of others deserve it as well. And the recognition that this still goes on, even right at the end of the book. Rosa says to the guy who helped her, Michael Monette, but this woman Dory, the one in the cannabis house, she's still free, isn't she, to be trafficking people? And it's again the recognition that this still goes on.
She's an appealing character, and she has a lot of strength.
I think you want to write characters that jump off the page and that get you thinking, yes, I really care. And essentially that's what makes a good book, isn't it? I belong to a book group, and so often we'll say, oh, I just couldn't persevere with that story. I didn't care about any of the characters. And you have to feel, yes, I want to see this person succeed. And I think my readers can see what a really hard time that she was having, and she was being quite clever, quite ingenious in some ways, quite imaginative in how she was going to try and claw her way to freedom. This is why I love writing issue books, because you've got a character who's on the wrong side of the tracks maybe, and you really want to see them come through it and come out the other end. And yeah, they're still going to have flaws, and I think our readers will accept that. Rosa came through, she managed to overcome her obstacles, she managed to achieve her goal in the end. But without spoiling the ending, the character is still not perfect. You could go on and write another story about Rosa, and you'd be looking to see what she still hadn't got right.
And one of the things that really struck me right at the end of the book, so long after the reader has invested in her, her refusal to allow herself to remain bitter against the people who put her through all that. I thought that was really striking. I presume you felt it was important that she...
I did. I really did. Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because I'd forgotten about that in terms of the values. No, I just thought, if she comes through this and she's always looking for the bad in people, she's always bitter about what's happened to her. It's going to lock her up. I think we all know this, don't we? People who hang on to bitterness, they're never really free. I needed her to be free in the widest possible sense, not just physically, but in her head, to be able to move on. And yes, I'm sure She would have counselling to help her get through this. The fact that her dad had let her down so badly, the people who were supposed to care about her and love her. But nevertheless, she didn't want to feel bitter because she had a prime example in front of her of Adelina, whose bitterness had forced her to behave as she did towards Rosa. I just felt for me that was a really important thing to say at the end of the book.
What do you hope that your readers will take away from reading the book?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I've had some opportunities to go into schools, and I've developed a presentation about trafficking, which includes a quiz and a short film, something really interactive, talking to the kids about what they know about trafficking. What I sometimes say to them is, you are young people, you imagine yourself at your age in Rosa's shoes. Or somebody who's gone through the same kinds of experiences. How would you feel about that? Maybe some of you will actually go on to campaign, with an anti-slavery organisation. I know you won't all do that. It won't be something that will grab all of you. My hope and my prayer has been sometimes that there will be a section, 2 or 3 in every group of 30 that I talk to, who will, like me, just be grabbed by that idea that this is something that shouldn't be allowed to go on. And it's massive problem. We're talking about, 40 million is the estimated amount of slaves in the world today, but they could actually make a difference. I always think to myself, oh, really, is anybody really going to take this up? But that's ridiculous to be so defeatist about it. In the back of the book, there are some notes giving people ideas for what they can do and how they could join an anti-slavery organisation when they're a bit older. Who knows, in years to come, I might get people saying to me, I read your book when I was 14 and now I'm working for, I suppose that would be every writer's dream.
Sue, having spent 15 years writing the book, what was it like to get the kind of response that you got from The Guardian and the other accolades that have come the book's way? How was that for you as a writer?
Well, just beyond my wildest expectations is probably the best way to describe it now. We were looking for some affirmation, if you like, that it had been the right decision for me to write it, and for Sophie and Cadence to have agreed to publish it. So the first thing was that Miriam Halami, who's written some great books about challenging issues that young people find themselves in as well, gave us a great review for the first edition. And then I was traveling through France. I got this great text from Sophie to say that The Guardian had included this in their young adult reviews, and to our absolute joy, described it as compulsively readable, etc., etc.
I was going to say, are you aware of that opening other doors for the book? The fact that such a visible authority as The Guardian was endorsing it?
If you're published by a smaller publishing company, then it is a bit more of a struggle, and a lot of the publicity is really down to you and your publisher. Whereas obviously in a large publisher, they have a big budget for marketing and publicity.
Yes. But one of the best things that happened for sales was ending up on the Read for Empathy list the following year, wasn't it?
Yes. So that was last year. Sophie put us in as a recommendation for an organisation called Empathy Lab, which does a great job. They've only been around about 10 years, maybe less than that. And they're on the lookout for books with children in challenging situations. So it might be a child who's born with Down syndrome, a child with neurodivergency, a child who's been adopted, refugees coming, who've escaped from Syria, for example. That's one book I've read that really springs to mind. And in my story about a victim of human trafficking ticked the box for them as far as they were concerned. So that was really the icing on the cake, being told that we'd been included in their young adult book collection for 2024. Very, very exciting.
Yes,
Right.
very much so. So what are your greatest influences then?
When I had the idea for my first book, I got hooked onto a book called Lizzie's Leaving by the late, great Joan Lingard, who wrote some wonderful stories, not just for children, but adults as well. And that was the writer that gave me the inspiration to write my own story about a girl who'd been adopted and who was looking for her birth mother. Things I loved. A wonderful book called A Gathering Light by the writer Jennifer Donnelly. So that won the Carnegie Medal in 2003. It's about a young girl living on a farm in upstate New York at the beginning of the 20th century. A little bit like Rosa in a way. She's lost her mum, to a disease, and she's the oldest in her family, so she's torn between family responsibilities, really wanting to be a writer, and also falling in love for the first time. And she's working as a waitress in one of the hotels, and then news comes that a body has been found in a local lake, and it's a young woman round about Mattie's age. And in Mattie's mind, their stories become inextricably linked. She has the opportunity to read some of the letters that this young woman wrote, in which she talked about all her hopes and dreams. She realizes that at the end of the book, she has the opportunity to follow through these hopes and dreams, and this young woman didn't. It's just a masterpiece of writing. It really is. And I think if you ask me which book would I ever like to have written, it's that one, because it's so original and beautifully crafted with a really great ending. Miriam Halami, I love her books. She's written a lot about children in challenging circumstances and young people. She has had a big impact on my writing too. And Anne Cassidy is another one. She always writes really real thrillers.
Brilliant. What are you writing at the moment? Are you working on something now?
Yes, I am. Yeah. They always say when you're coming to the end of writing one book, you should always be thinking about the next. Well, two writing projects, really. As Sophie knows, very sadly and tragically, we lost our son in November 2023. So I've decided to write a bio from when he was born. I'm one of these people who's kept a diary for most of my life. So I've got loads and loads of stories about Tom when he was little. And I really wanted to do that because he's got 3 young boys, and it'll be great for them to read about the sort of stuff Daddy got up to when he was little, which nobody else would know. You know, their mum wouldn't know that. So I've got that a little bit on the back burner at the moment because I'm really excited about the story I'll just tell you about now. So it's a young adult thriller involving a boy called Jason, who is a secondary character in Sold. And he's now 19. He's training to be a paramedic, but he's also become a kinship carer for his mum, who is disabled. So he's got a lot on his plate. And then he meets this really nice girl called Essie. She comes into his life by chance, really, and she offers to be his mum's paid carer. And he just thinks, oh, that's amazing, because I can carry on now with my training. But what he doesn't know about Essie is that she had a very troubled childhood, and she's also recently been involved in a very serious crime.
So thank you so much, Sue. It's been really lovely chatting to you. And where can we find you online?
I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I have a website, and the website address is www.suebarrow.com.
Well, that was the last of our 3 launch episodes of Beneath the Page. Our next episode will be released out into the world on Wednesday, the 7th of May, and we're going to be looking to put a new episode out every 2 weeks after that. I really enjoyed that conversation with Sue, and I can understand why you're so excited about having published the book.
Sold was the first book that Cadence produced, and if I'd done nothing else, I would be so proud of it.
Yes, quite right. It's a great book and I think an important book.
All the links we've mentioned are in the show notes.
If you enjoyed what you heard, please do feel free to like and follow on whatever platform you're listening. And if you'd like to leave us a review, that would be even better. All of that helps people to discover the podcast and hear the other great interviews that we've got coming up.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.